Welcome back to our final day of coverage from the 3 days of testing in Barcelona to kick off the action on track and really start the winter proceedings in Formula One as we move towards the 2022 start of the season here at GPFans. Delighted to say joining myself, Ollie Wilson, is our global editor-in-chief, Mr. Ian Parks, down there in Barcelona at the Circuit de Catalunya. How are you doing, Ian? The final day is in the books and there's plenty to get through from the last 3 days or so, I imagine.
Yeah, it's been quite a tiring 3 days, to be honest. These 12-hour days covering all this work is a bit of a killer, it has to be said. But it's been great 3 days. Loads of running for the majority of the teams. Some have had their major issues, as we've seen. But I think a lot of the teams are going to go away pretty happy with what they've completed here. Mercedes coming out on top today, a 1-2. Don't read too much into that, by the way. A lot of sandbagging going on. A lot of these teams still learning about these cars. So as I say, yeah, Lewis was top, put in a hot lap right at the end, or a few hot laps actually, right at the end, last 15, 20 minutes or so. He was purpling sectors all over the place. And he comes out on top with George second. He was quickest in the morning session today. But as I say, don't read anything into it. Mercedes certainly saying they've got their issues, they've got their problems, and they believe they are not quickest at all.
Yeah, we were talking about them struggling for pace, I think, come the end of yesterday. So suddenly to see them in the 1-2 position is just a reminder, I think, more than anything else, that we shouldn't take those lap times into account too much at this point. But you touched on perhaps some difficulties for some of the teams. We've seen two cars go up in flames, not quite engulfed obviously, but with a fair bit of smoke and a few licks of fire around the back of the Alpine and the Aston Martin today, and a number of red flags as well. Why do you think on this third day of testing that we've seen so many stoppages and problems for some of the teams, after particularly the first day and a half was pretty much so clean?
Yeah, I remember we discussed that, and we were going on about just how great it was. When we're saying how reliable these cars were proving, what a great start it was for all of the teams, that they were really clocking up the laps for the most part and getting great reliability and proving that these cars have got great reliability. And then all of a sudden we have these 5 red flags all in the morning session. Bizarrely, that was heavily disrupted. Started with Fernando. He had a real roller coaster for his 12 laps. He went off on his very first lap into the gravel, came back, cleared out all the stones, then posted in the quickest lap. And then a few laps later, conked to a halt, as we saw, smoke billowing from his car. And that was the end of Alpine's day. So that was a real poor one from their perspective. And then late on in the session, after we'd also had a couple of red flags for Guan Yu Zhu in the Alfa Romeo, and of course that off Pierre Gasly, that was the end of their day as well, pretty much. Well, it was the end of their day. He went off and spun off at turn 5. And again, the team unable to complete the repairs. And then as I was about to say, Aston Martin right at the end, oil leak for Sebastian Vettel, another small fire in his car, as was the case with Fernando Alonso's Alpine, and that was their running as well. So for the afternoon session, we only had half the field that was due to take to the track, and which was just to quickly dive away from what we were just discussing. That was quite an unusual one because I don't know if you're aware, Ollie, but they decided to completely water the track during the lunch break. So that meant that for the early part of the afternoon, the teams that were still up and running managed to get some wet weather tyre evaluation in, which was pretty useful from their perspective, because they've now got some valuable information that a lot of the other teams won't have. Obviously, Pirelli will have taken data on board and they'll be able to share with those other teams that weren't able to make it. But for the most part, those teams that did run this afternoon have got a little bit of an upper hand on some of their rivals.
I did want to ask, how difficult is it if you miss a session, of course, particularly in these first 3 days, with all the changes that we've had to the fuel and of course to the aerodynamic regulations as well? If there is a big chunk of data that will be missing for those teams that weren't able to run, and of course with the wet weather track as well, that's something that we're not going to see or really experience, I'd have imagined, in Bahrain in that second testing session before going into the first race of the season. So it's a big chunk of ground lost potentially for those teams.
It is, and especially for the likes of Haas and Alfa Romeo, who have real up and down time here. Monday for both teams was near enough a washout. Today for both teams, again the same. Only on the middle day, yesterday, the Thursday, did they really get any reasonable running in. So those two teams in particular are way behind the eight ball, shall we say, compared to some of the rivals. Ferrari, great reliability. Mercedes, Red Bull, great number of laps posted by both of those teams as well. So the front runners that we're all expecting to still be there, regardless of these new aerodynamic regulations that had been hoped to shake up the field, the front runners have really managed to clock up the laps, rack up the mileage, and they've gained loads and loads of data. Now they are going to have a real advantage over some of the teams that have really struggled. Even the likes of AlphaTauri that only managed half a day, Aston Martin only half a day today, they will be lacking considerable amount of data. So they know they've now got extra work to do when it comes to the 3 days in Bahrain. They know they've got to keep their cars reliable, on track, and just pounding out those laps, as we're saying, because all data with these new regulations is absolutely invaluable going into those first few races.
And I imagine for the drivers as well, for instance, the likes of Yuki Tsunoda obviously missed out on the afternoon running in the session. And as Charles Leclerc commented that we saw on GPFans.com earlier today, actually it might have been the back end of yesterday. I'm getting very confused with all of the testing that's been going on in the last few days, but that these cars are feeling heavier. So it's really important for the drivers to log in as much time as they can. And missing an afternoon session for an individual driver could also hinder them going into the first weekend of the season.
Absolutely. Every driver wants to be in that car for as long as possible across all of the sessions. So if you think about it, every single driver has pretty much got 3 4-hour sessions, as was the case here. I'm assuming it's going to be a similar run plan in Bahrain, and they'll have an hour's lunch break between the morning and the afternoon session. We'll have to wait and see. Sometimes they have been known to go completely through the day without stopping. So we'll just have to see what the run plan is there, because it is important that the teams do get that break so they can evaluate the data more efficiently during that lunch break. But as you say, every driver wants to be in that car for as long as possible, because as we've seen here, with this porpoising effect, as we were discussing, they want to get on top of that. And they want to work with the teams, they want to help the teams iron out all these niggles or any niggles that they come across to ensure that the car is as healthy and as clean and as reliable as it possibly can be going into that first race in Bahrain, which is now just 3 weeks away.
Now, you mentioned Haas, obviously, and that's a team that is having a very interesting testing period, to say the least, over the last couple of days. And there have been the developments, of course, with Formula One and their statement and decision on the Russian Grand Prix for 2022. Can you just give us some feedback in what's happening with Haas? Obviously, Nikita Mazepin is at the heart of this politics meets sport situation that we have in Formula One right now, of course, and Haas very closely linked, of course, with the financial backing that they have from Russia and from Nikita Mazepin's father as well. So just can you give us a little bit more detail on the developments and the interactions that you've seen around the paddock the last 24 hours or so regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, as if things weren't bad enough for Haas on track, they've had to, over the past couple of days, had to deal with all this stuff going on behind the scenes, off track as well. And for them, it's just been a pre-season test they will want to forget in a hurry. The upshot is that, as we know, following with great sadness Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and we've all seen the images and the TV footage coming out of there, and it's just horrific. And what is the world coming to in many respects? But you know, Formula One is still going on, but for Haas, they they put on track this morning a plain liveried car. They've removed all their sponsorship relating to Uralkali, which is their primary sponsor. That's a Russian potash and fertilizer company that's owned by oligarch Dmitry Mazepin, who is the father of Nikita. He's ploughed a lot of money into the team since he came on board, and in particular since Nikita was named as a driver ahead of last season. So it's been with a lot of deliberation going on behind the scenes, but they've had to act in the best interests of both the team itself, first and foremost, but also on behalf of the entire Formula One community to get rid of the logos. This included the blue and red striping on the car, because as we know, when this car has been unveiled, it's very much bore the colours of the Russian flag, the white, blue and red. So as I say, just a white and black car today for the most part. All Uralkali branding has been stripped off the team trucks. It's been taken down off the website as well. So they've really had to look deep into what they needed to do to ensure they are the best team going forward in many respects, as I say, for the interests of Formula One. So what's going to happen now is that over the next few days, the lawyers at Haas, they're going to look into the contracts they've got with Uralkali to see what the way forward is, because it looks like, as I said, there are legal ramifications for this. Uralkali would have signed deals with Haas. So Gunther Steiner, the team principal, spoke extensively on the matter early this afternoon, and he's promised, as I say, they're going to be looking into this, and there should be answers next week. And as for Nikita, we're not quite sure what's going to happen with him. He's unfortunately, through no fault of his own, become deeply embroiled in this now. Given he's a Russian driver, but given more importantly, he's the links of his father to what's going on back in Russia. And Gunther cannot give any guarantees as to Nikita's future as we talk about this right now. So that's, again, going to be one to keep a close eye on to see what the situation is with him. But obviously, the team is quite sympathetic to Nikita, especially as well, given some of the abuse that he's faced on social media, including, many people will know the name of this gentleman, a certain Jeremy Clarkson, who posted a tweet that was quite unpleasant and very unbecoming for a man of his standing, and is something that he really should have taken down, because a driver in Nikita's position does not deserve anything along those lines.
Yeah, it's a very difficult position for Nikita Mazepin to be in. It's an ever-evolving situation, of course, in the global political sphere, and Formula One is trying, I think, to react as best as they can to everything that's going on. And we will, of course, here at GP Fans keep a close eye on all of those developments around Haas and obviously the Grand Prix in Sochi for 2022, as Ian brought us earlier, has been axed from the calendar, despite what the Russian Grand Prix organisers are trying to say that it's been suspended. It is clear-cut, as we've said on gpfans.com, that it has been axed. Just finally, we had Lando Norris and George Russell. They're very good friends off the track, Ian. On the track, they gave us a little demonstration of perhaps what battling in a Formula One race will be like this season, and both had a word of warning to Formula One about the aerodynamic changes, about the inability to catch a slipstream. Talk to me more about that briefly.
Yeah, as everybody knows, we have these new aerodynamic regulations that have been brought in for this season, with the hope that the cars can follow more closely, that they will be able to overtake more easily. And as you rightly pointed out there, Ollie, during the drivers' press conference today, involving Lando and George, they both mentioned the fact that George in particular attempted to overtake Lando. We all know anyway that Barcelona, Circuit de Catalunya here, is notoriously difficult for overtaking. But you would hope that this would be one of those tracks where, given the new regulations, that it would be that little bit easier. But according to what George was saying, that might not be the case, because whilst he pointed out that it is now much easier to follow a car in front, actually the slipstreaming effect has been greatly reduced, and therefore he was unable to pass Lando. Lando, realizing that George was trying to overtake him, did his absolute best to ensure that was not going to be the case, and he came out on top in that little battle. Now, it was just one small battle, but it was a word of warning from both drivers that, hold on a second, yes, we can follow, but maybe the fact that we can't slipstream like we used to, that is now going to play a part in the racing going forward. As I say, it's Barcelona. It's never easy here, but we can only hope that when it does come down to the Grand Prix, that we are going to be given greater battles than we've seen in the past at some of the tracks that are that little bit more difficult to overtake.
I mean, Ian, I'm blaming you for this one because yesterday you told me that perhaps we could look at the possibility of losing DRS in Formula One. And now we have the news today that maybe we might still need it just to stick around for a few more years as F1 adapts to the new aerodynamic regulations and tries to give us the best racing on track. Mate, thank you so much for joining us. All of your hard work across, obviously, the live blog on gpfans.com and at GPFans Global on Twitter and Instagram, and thoroughly enjoyed these reviews of the last 3 days as well, mate. I look forward to chatting with you on the GP Fans Stewards Room podcast when we get back to racing again as well.
It's been my pleasure, Ollie. Great to do business with you as always. Take care, pal.
And remember to hit the subscribe button down below to follow all of our content here on the YouTube channel as well throughout the build up to the new 2022 season, heading into that first race in Bahrain come the end of March.